So good afternoon to everyone. My name is Rafael Muruaiz, acting head of the Energy System Department at ACER. I'm pleased to open this webinar on benefit-based remuneration for energy infrastructure investments. And overall, I'm humbled and honored to be surrounded by a set of experts. So I thank you for all the participants that joined physically in the room, but also to many of those that are online. We have been told that it was a large number of colleagues online. And thank you for having chosen to spend these 2 hours with us. That is what we envisaged for this event. And a special thanks to the speakers that will be introduced as we move with the agenda of the event. I will just say 1 or 2 words on the background because other colleagues, other speakers will also talk about the policy context and the context of the study. But I will say a couple of words from the regulator's point of view. So first of all, the event is organized in a context that I think that we all share or we share a same understanding. That is the need for a rapid expansion of grids, both at transmission and distribution level, which also requires innovation. Importantly, because I think that this is what we are going to be talking today, innovation is, of course, on the technology side, innovation by technology providers, innovation by TSOs and DSOs, but also innovation on the regulatory side. I think that regulators should also be part of this equation to make innovation happen. And in ACER, we are firm believers that we should do something about it as regulators. The report will be presented and published today, and is the complement of previous work undergone by ACER together with FSR on how to put in place incentives to deploy smart and efficient investments. I think that the scope of the study will be explained a bit more later, but in a nutshell, there were 2 main goals, 2 main objectives. One is to map already existing incentive schemes that are already out there, and also develop, or maybe more importantly, develop examples of remuneration via benefit sharing. Maybe 1 more word, also the context is important to note that the action grid, the action plan for grids by the European Commission also acknowledge the importance of these initiatives, and it stresses that this topic deserves special attention. We'll be talking about it very soon. So to finalize on this part, the main goal is to present the benefit sharing scheme that is developed on behalf of ACER by FSR, with the intention that can be implemented in practice. So we have a firm intention that we also move from theory, from good ideas to practice. So that's from my side in terms of background. In terms of agenda, you see there, we, before starting with the presentation of the study, will have some interventions, in particular by the European Commission. I understand that not from regulators, also from regulators after. Okay, this is right after. Okay, sorry. So we have first a first intervention by the European Commission, then the presentation, some intervention by regulators, and then a panel discussion. Maybe we can move to housekeeping rules that are very simple. Essentially only 1, that is, we ask you to be a bit patient with the questions. There will be opportunity, a dedicated Q&A. So in principle, we'll reserve all the questions for that moment. There will be half an hour after the panel discussion where you can pose your questions. For those in the room, you can, of course, raise hand and intervene. For those that are online, you can place anytime the question in the Q&A section of Teams, and then we'll formulate here up loud for everyone. I think that's all from my side. With that, I would like to give the floor to Anca Simpeanu, who is Deputy Head of Unit at DG Ener in the area of infrastructure and regional cooperation. And I would give now gladly the floor to you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Rafael, for the introduction. Thanks a lot for the invitation. I'm very pleased to be here today with you. I've sort of followed this topic from the beginning, and I was happy to see how it has developed into this detailed report today. So I will just briefly present you the policy context, because I'm sure there are no strangers to the context in which we are today. So the decarbonization of the economy, the resilience of the energy sector, and ensuring affordable prices for consumers share a common need, the rapid development of our grid. Co-legislators have made their views clear. We need an enormous uptake of renewables, electromobility, heat pumps, and electrification initiatives. This will enable us not only to realize the energy transition, but also to lower our dependencies in energy imports and keep final consumer bills at check. The readiness of our electricity grids can be an enabler to such transformation, or it can be a bottleneck. And in order to ensure that this is not a bottleneck, we should take action urgently to ensure that grids remain what they should, the cornerstone that paves the way to other challenges that need to be, to other changes that need to be realized. To achieve this, we need not only a significant development of new transmission and distribution infrastructure, but also maximizing the use of existing grids. These courses of action do not exclude each other, but need to work in parallel. Last November, we made a clear roadmap on what is needed in the short term. We adopted the EU Grid Action Plan, which with tasks to ACER, NSOE, EU DSO entity, manufacturers, and of course for ourselves, for the Commission. It addresses the need for reinforcing network development planning, regulatory regimes that encourage anticipatory investments, digitalization and flexibility procurement, the promotion of smart grid solutions, innovation and grid efficiency, adequate access to financing, streamlining permitting procedures, and last but not least, of course, a capable supply chain. These actions are complementary to each other, so the impact is multiplied when they will all be achieved together. The Commission, together with the entities I already mentioned, with our partners in the action plan, ACER, the EU DSO entity, NSOE, and other stakeholders, are currently making a big effort in ensuring the action plan moves from a political direction to implementation, to see already the results. We will take stock of where we stand in only 3 weeks from now at the Energy Infrastructure Forum in Copenhagen. But more on the topic of today's discussion over the study, I should highlight that there are many aspects of efficiency linked to grids. One is now enshrined in EU law through the energy efficiency. The Energy Efficiency Directive, the updated one, attributes new tasks to the national regulatory authorities concerning approving, verifying, or monitoring system operators' investments. The directive expands the definition of efficiency to include energy efficiency according to the energy efficiency first principle, besides the traditional economic efficiency. And NRAs have to report on the progress achieved in energy efficiency improvements regarding the operation of the gas and electricity infrastructure. Another aspect of the concept of efficiency, which is also relevant for NRAs and not only, is cost efficiency, which is of course intrinsically linked to infrastructure efficiency. Developing these concepts is part of Action 8 of the Grid Action Plan, which Rafael already mentioned, which calls on ACER first to recommend best practices in relation to the promotion of smart grids and network efficiency technologies through tariff design, but also benefit sharing. ACER then has to support the implementation of such best practices. The need to develop efficiency, cost efficiency, and also innovation was also recently highlighted just last week in the Council conclusions that were adopted on infrastructure by the Energy Council on the 30th of May, which found that cost efficiency in grid development is essential in view of the massive amount of investments necessary, but also innovation. These serve not only for new investments, but also for smartening existing grids. Therefore, I'm very pleased to note that the study subject to today's discussion is more relevant than ever in terms of finding the best regulatory approach to achieving these goals. We would be very happy to see examples of innovative regulatory practices taken up and be put in practice in the near future, not only at transmission level, but also as much as possible at distribution level as well. And I look forward to all the discussions today, but also to continuing the debate in session 3 of the Copenhagen Infrastructure Forum. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Anka. Overall, while we get ready for the presentation of the study, just to know that we are happy to hear from you that you see the relevance of the study, and in particular that it brings examples that are real and can be implemented, and that there will be an opportunity to continue the discussion in Copenhagen. So thanks a lot for your words. I will now pass the floor to our next speaker. That's actually Nicolo Rosetto, who will be presenting the study subject of this event. I'll say a word about Nicolo. So he's a research fellow at the Florence School of Regulation. He's involved mostly in topics such as the integration of the European electricity system and markets, new business models, digitalization, and energy communities, among many topics. So a wide range of topics. And please, the floor is yours to start. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good afternoon to everybody. Yes, in the next 20 minutes, I would like to give you the flavor of this report. I hope online you hear me well. First, of course, I would like to thank ACER for, of course, supporting this study. So this is the outline of my contribution. So I will start with a short reflection about why we might need an additional regulatory scheme. And actually, you heard already some of the justifications. Then I would like to share with you the essence of the proposal we developed. I will fly over, due to time constraints, over some implementation aspects of the scheme that we think are quite important. I will provide you just a little reference to the stakeholder consultation that we conducted over the past few months. And then I will conclude by illustrating how the scheme could work in practice with reference to a specific sample case where I will show you some realistic, not necessarily real, but realistic numbers. So why an additional regulatory scheme? Well, you heard already from the people before me that grid expansion, or transformation at least, of our energy grids is essential to support the energy transition and the accelerated energy transition that the European Union committed to. And there is an understanding that the traditional approach to grids, to grid expansion, may not be fully adequate to deal with this challenge for various reasons. In the regulatory debate over the past few years, this was well recognized. And one of the things that was, I would say, quite widely recognized was the shift, the move from an OPEX and CAPEX based remuneration of networks to a TOTEX-based regulation of the revenues of networks, because this would address one of the key issues that we experienced in the past, the so-called CAPEX bias, so the tendency for regulated entities to invest in solutions capital intensive with a heavy physical investment at the beginning. We think this is important, but probably does not tell you the entire story, because indeed we want to avoid any CAPEX bias, but more in general, given the daunting task of the energy transition, we need to promote as much as possible innovative and, I would say, total minimum cost solution. So not only CAPEX intensive, but in general, TOTEX heavy solutions, and of course promote the timely deployment of those solutions. And the idea behind the proposed scheme is that we could provide an incentive to the regulated entity, the TSO in particular, and this incentive could be calibrated on the basis of the cost efficiency of the different solutions that can address the various system needs. And indeed, this would be a kind of benefit sharing mechanism because, of course, any reduction in cost is a benefit for network user. And as Anka said, this is a part also of the action plan for grid, so I will not spend more time on this. Given this general framework, let's see in a nutshell what the proposed scheme looks like. Here you see, I would say, the flow of decision steps that must be taken to implement the scheme. Everything starts with the regulator identifying or confirming certain system needs that must be addressed, must be satisfied. And also the regulator, so all the green boxes, let's say, represent boxes where the regulator take a decision. So the identification of the system need, the identification of a standard solution to deliver on that system need or set of system needs, and the associated cost. Of course, the regulator can rely on inputs also from other actors, including obviously the TSO, which often has an extensive and direct experience of these things, but ultimately is the regulator who should bear the responsibility of approving the need, the identification of the solution, and the associated cost. At the same time, the regulator should ask, in the proposal we make, should ask the TSO to come up with an innovative solution. So something new, something different from the traditional way to address that need. And of course, come up with an estimate of the cost associated with that innovative solution. And this is the boxes in red where the TSO has take the lead. Finally, and this is the bottom green box, you calculate, you compute the incentive on the basis of the difference between the two costs, the cost of the traditional and the cost of the innovative solution. And as we will also see later, the idea is that this cost, this comparison is among values in, cost in net present values, because of course the standard and the innovative solution may have different cost structures. Costs may be distributed differently over time, and therefore to have a proper comparison, you need to calculate the NPVs. Maybe you already understood from this flow of decision steps that the proposal we make does not replace the entire regulatory framework, but actually simply provide an additional tool that regulators can use. So comes on top of these potentially different national regulatory frameworks. Of course, with the scheme, there is a set of allowed revenues for the regulated entity, for the TSO. I will not explain this. You can see later on there is the math behind. Just let me tell you, of course, that the scheme can be calibrated a bit depending on additional elements you want to highlight. For instance, you can calibrate the incentive on the basis of any delay in the implementation of the solution, or in case the innovative solution does not deliver the expected benefits, you can, of course, reduce the incentive. But the information that you see in this slide in the mathematics, actually, I wanted to show you graphically here. Let's start from the incentive. You have the two axes, the cost of the chosen solution, so the innovative solution, and the incentive. The incentive, actually, the value of the incentive is the yellow line. So you see that being C star, the cost of the traditional solution, when the innovative solution has a cost of equal to 0, then the incentive is maximum and is equal to a share of the cost of the traditional solution, so alpha by C star. Then, of course, as far as the cost of the chosen, the innovative solution increases, also the value of the incentive gets smaller and eventually becomes zero. The TSO is not expected to get only the incentive, of course, but also a remuneration of the declared cost ex ante of the innovative solution. And so here you see the entire allowed revenues that the TSO is entitled to. It's the green line. The red line is the cost of the chosen solution. And and then you can easily see the value of the incentive, and which is the difference between the red and the green line until the level of C star. And then the difference between the green line and the dashed green line is the benefit, the cost saving that is passed immediately to grid user. Of course, eventually grid user will benefit from the innovative solution becoming the standard over time. But in the first round, of course, they only get a share of this benefit because the rest goes to the TSO. Implementation aspects. Of course, this scheme is quite generic. Then regulators that want to implement it can or should take a number of decisions, should decide on several design aspects. In the report, we focus on three of them, which are quite important according to us: the discount rate, the sharing factor, and the incentive profile. The discount rate, of course, depending on the discount rate you choose, you may give a smaller or a bigger weight to the costs that take place sooner on time, vis-a-vis those that take place farther away into the future. You have various options. You could use the WACC, maybe better the social rate of time preference that you can estimate from risk-free bonds. You could use also the real discount rate recommended by ACER for the cost-benefit analysis of energy infrastructure. Then another design aspect particularly important is the definition of the sharing factor. And here clearly you have a trade-off because if the sharing factor is higher, you will provide a stronger incentive to the TSO, but of course you will reduce the benefit that goes to the grid user immediately. And the sharing factor, of course, you can set a fixed one, or maybe you can even think of adopting a sliding sharing factor, whose value depends on the level of the total cost saving you want to share. Finally, about the incentive profile, of course, you need to choose in how many years you want to pay out this incentive, if you want to pay it out in equal installments or not. Again, you have a trade-off here because the shorter the payout period, the stronger probably the incentive for the TSO to look for innovative solution. On the other hand, if you pay out immediately the incentive, you might not have time to assess properly the performance of the innovative solution, and then maybe if the solution does not deliver, you will have to look for the money back, and it might be more difficult. You may also think that TSOs, that regulated entities, may have different preferences. Some of them may be more risk-averse than others, so may prefer stronger or less powerful incentives. So a possibility could also be to offer a menu of options. About implementation, it's not only these design aspects to be chosen, but also the challenges. And that's clear to us that the proposed scheme, it's not without its own challenges. Actually, during the consultation that I will mention in shortly, a few stakeholders highlight those challenges. But our understanding, also on the basis of the comments we received during the consultation, is that those challenges are not of a different nature from the typical one that regulators face when implementing network regulation and incentive regulation in particular. So, of course, you need the regulators to say what are the needs of the system that the system operator must satisfy. You need to identify, to approve the solutions to address those needs and to assess the cost of those solution. And of course, in case you want to apply to implement incentive regulation, you need to think about how strong, how organized your incentive should be. And finally, there is uncertainty. Of course, the world can turn in a different way than the one imagined at the moment of setting up the scheme, and therefore you need to prepare for different evolution and possibly implement mechanisms that minimize the possible negative consequences of uncertainty for the system. So nothing incredibly new in our understanding. Stakeholder consultation. One of the important aspects of the project was the consultation of NREs, TSOs, and in general, the wider public, because we wanted to hear from them about the general principles behind the scheme and the implementation features of the scheme, including the sample cases, and one of them I will illustrate it and shortly. There was a good participation, several NRAs, some TSO in particular provided useful feedback, and that's it. We had some workshops and webinars. I would say that the feedback was important to validate the ideas and also to introduce some fine-tuning, some nuances with regard to our initial ideas, but not major changes, I would say. Having said that, let me use the last 5 minutes to illustrate how the scheme could work in practice with a reference to a specific system need. Let's assume that the regulators identify the need to increase the cross-border capacity by a certain amount, maybe because there is always more request from the market, congestion, and so on. And then they ask to engineers, and engineers reply that the usual way to satisfy that increase in transfer capacity is by laying down an additional high voltage line to upgrade the transformers and so on. Then the regulator asks to the economist, and they say that, well, a project like that might cost around 180 million euro. These numbers we calculated, I mean, you have to take them as cum grano salis, they are just to have a reference for you, and we took inspiration from the ACER unit cost report. So 180 million euro as the cost of as the investment cost of the traditional solution, so the high voltage line, with limited operation and maintenance cost, 1%, and a very long useful life, 40 years and more. Then, based on this techno-economic information, you compute the revenue requirements for the TSO. Of course, you adopt here an assumption about the remuneration of capital. We use here a WACC of 5.25%, if I'm not wrong, and you have the net present value of 320 million euro, roughly speaking. And this is actually how the situation would look like on the field. You would have the border between the two countries or the two market zones. Maybe you have already 3 lines already congested, and the traditional solution is simply to lay down the green new line that will, let's say, alleviate the congestion on the other existing lines. But then, the novelty. Let's assume that the NRE asked the TSO to come up with a solution, and the TSO check internally with its engineers and discover that maybe by deploying dynamic line rating over the existing lines and by deploying a phase shifting transformer on the most congested line, you can increase the transfer capacity between the two market zones. And then you estimate that this solution is actually quite cheaper than the previous one. You have an investment cost of roughly 60 million euro. Interestingly, and differently from the other case, investments do not take place only in the first year, but actually, again, there are some investments in the 11th, 21st year, and so on, because some of the assets, in particular the hardware associated with the DLR system, may need to be replaced every 10 years or so. Operation and maintenance costs are higher in percentage terms than in the other projects. Let's assume they are roughly 1 million euro per year. And then you get the revenue requirement of the new solution associated to the new solution. You see it's much smaller, 133 million euro. Of course, engineers will tell that, with the DLR, if it's a hot day and windy, there is not much that the dynamic line rating can help. So with this solution, of course, you do not exactly deliver the same system need than the traditional one. So you have to take this into account. On the field, this is, let's say, graphically the situation. You put the dashed lines as the DLR systems, and then, let's say, on the most congested line, you put the PST that will divert the flows when needed. Okay, given this, let's say, sketch of the techno-economic characteristics of the two solutions, you can now calculate your incentive. First, you calculate the difference in net present value of the cost associated to the two solutions, adjusted for the fact, of course, that the second solution does not deliver the same need as the first, only in the 73% of the time. And you get this number, 193 million euro. This is, in NPV terms, the savings for the system. Assuming a sharing factor of 20%, you got, which is a reasonable number also according to the survey we conducted in the consultation, you get an incentive in net present value terms of almost 40 million euro. And if you decide to pay it in 2 years in equal installment, this is, you need to pay to the TSO 20 million euro per year. So this is how the mechanism would work. And with this, let's say, I can go to the conclusions. Maybe I will focus just on the main one, because the other probably you already heard. Challenges exist. They do not look very different from the typical challenges associated with network regulation. And our impression, our perception is that if the problem is a lack of resources for NIAs to implement the proposed scheme, given the huge amount of investments we are expected to deliver in the coming years, and the potential for cost savings that we saw in the sample cases, you saw it was almost 200 million euros associated simply to one project. Probably it is a profitable choice, would be a wise choice for member states to invest more resources in the NIAs so that they can implement the scheme proposed. And with this, I concluded. Thank you very much.
Yep. Thank you, Niccolò. Thanks a lot for making it perfectly on time. By the way, you did an excellent job. I'm sure there are questions I actually have as well, but as we said that we would reserve them for the Q&A, I again insist that we are a bit patient, but feel free to, for those that are online, to pose questions in the Q&A if you like, and those that are in the room to write them down and be ready when the time comes. That is not too far from now. So now I will want to give the floor to Clara Poletti. Hope you are online and ready to open your mic. Oh, fantastic. Hello, Clara. Glad to see you or hear you online at least. So I will give you the floor immediately to you. Everyone knows Clara. I don't know if you need any introduction. She's the commissioner of ARERA, the Italian regulator, and also the chair of the Board of Regulators at ACER. And you will be giving the perspective of regulators on the topic at hand today. So please, Clara, whenever you wish. You have 10 minutes in theory, so please feel free to use it as you wish.
Yeah, thank you. But let me clarify, I'm not bringing the voice of regulators. This is an overarching discussion with a lot of technical competence behind. I'm going to bring my own view, if you don't mind. I don't feel like I can summarize the view of European regulators. I'm not even sure that I can represent the view of the Italian regulators. So let me tell you what I think. First of all, I believe this is a very important and interesting topic. And I think, as Nicolò was saying, incentive regulation is a very old topic. It was born with independent regulation in Europe. So it was end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s with the price cap regulation and all that stuff. And since then, we've been adjusting our incentive-based mechanism. So one way to look at it would be to say, we know how to do it. We've been doing it for a long time. We need a minor adjustment, or maybe not even that. Another way to look at it is the way we design our incentive mechanism have been changing over time according to the needs. And now, looking forward, probably there is something we need to adjust. So there is nothing right or wrong here, just a learning process and a need for an update. And I fully agree that there is a need for an update. But let me start back from the question that Nicolò was asking. Why do we need to change or to adapt or to improve, as you want? It's not a revolution. And maybe I'm not sure I fully agree with the reasons that you put forward, but still at the end I think we need to update. So the result would be maybe more in line. I think the traditional way of regulating grids under at least the theoretical framework in order to avoid the capex bias, as it was said, is TOTEX. If TOTEX is well designed, dynamically should give incentives to adopt whatever is useful to minimize cost. So if a capital light solution is available and the system operator knows is available under that type of scheme, it should be adopted, the solution, the least cost solution. So in a way, one could say TOTEX is already the answer. Is there, but why we need to change TOTEX? I think there are new or already existing, but now with a different way, issues that regulators need to address. The first one is the forward-looking approach. TOTEX is certainly potentially forward-looking. Historically, it didn't need to be really. Why? Or let me put it differently. We were in a sort of relatively stable situation and state with regards to investments. So there was no big push to look forward to a changing system. It was more like looking at the past, cost in the past, and adjusting them at each regulatory period. So it is forward-looking in a different way. because now we have a system that is completely changing, complexities are increasing, uncertainties are increasing. So I think this need for a forward-looking approach now is more urgent and more difficult to implement because of the uncertainties. So question, who should bear the risks and how I can best manage the risk? And some risks are symmetric between TSOs and regulators and consumers, some asymmetric, so it's a complex issue. The second one, if I look back to the classic TOTEX approach, since the beginning, regulators knew that TOTEX would minimize operating cost and overall cost, actually, by using at the best the existing technologies and infrastructures, but the risk was that quality of service could go down. So usually you have an economic regulation for cost, plus on top different layers regulating quality of service. But quality of service was a relatively well-defined set of parameters. Now we are talking more about performance, and performance is becoming more complex. And what do we need? And the definition of system needs and the definition of objectives for the medium long term is becoming more complex. So the question is, can we still have different layers, or we need to try to encompass and have a holistic framework where my costs are directly, my allowed revenues are directly related to performance. So the famous performance-based regulation. And this is something that you address in your proposal, for sure. So yes, I think this is something we have to think about because of what just said. So if this is the situation, what about the proposal that you are putting forward? The proposal is interesting, but to me it seems designed more for single projects, and where you very well identified more than system, more than an interrelated system where it is difficult to identify just one output and different ways of dealing with the output that you want. So I think the first step that we have to address, maybe sort of extrapolate, is the first step, that is the system needs. You start by assuming that system needs are known to regulators, but system needs are uncertain. And here is a time where you have to devise mechanisms to better understand the system needs and give a measure to the system needs. And this is going probably to be different for a distribution system and for transmission system, because they have different layers of complexities and the service is different. My second observation is on the standard solution. The standard solution usually doesn't exist per se. In complex system, you have an asymmetry in information in what is optimal in order to address a need. And so I would say, if you already know that a solution is optimal, then you implement it as a regulator. You simply ask the TSO to do it. But the point is that you usually don't. And this is why you need to put in place incentives. And so defining the baseline is a way to take into account all the information you have at that time, but then you have to recognize that you don't really know. And this is where incentives comes about. And the incentives, when designed, I'm sure I fully agree with your proposal, should be based on value. And value, you can call it benefits. And why so? Because if you do not, if you're not able to give a value to the different performances, then you are not able to give priorities and to push in the right direction. So whatever reduces cost is has the same value for the system, and we know that this is not the case. Finally, in terms of implementation, you assume the costs are known ex ante. The C star is known ex ante, but we know that changes in cost and differences between best estimates at the beginning and actual cost are have to be addressed, and I'm not sure in your proposal how you address that. And this is part of the risk sharing I was talking about before. So overall, I support the idea of a benefit-based type of incentive mechanism, forward-looking. Maybe I think we still need to better clarify how can that be done. But for sure, I fully support your proposal to look at the future with different eyes and try to see what we can do to make our regulatory framework fit for the future. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Clara. I wanted to thank you twice. First, for giving your personal views that I think is even more insightful than the views of regulators that sometimes is difficult to summarize and to align into one single opinion. So thank you very much for that. And also, while you were talking, Jan and myself, we were writing down a number of potential questions or challenges that you raised that are very valid. And this makes a perfect bridge. So we noted a few of your elements that you raised, from asymmetry of information, the difficulty to provide value, the difficulties to find a standard solution, and also the difference between systemic incentives versus single project incentives, among other challenges you raised. So this gives a perfect bridge for the next session, that is the panel. I will give the floor to my colleague, Jan Kosteuts. He will be chairing the panel with some experts, a number of experts that he will introduce as well. So again, thank you very much, Clara, and I pass the floor to Jan. Thank you.
Thank you, Rafa. I think it's best if we just straight on jump into the panel discussion. We have 4 panelists, very good esteemed panelists. I will introduce them one by one as I give them maybe the kickoff question, and then I think it's going to go into a discussion from that point. So I would start with Uroš Salobir, the chair of the Research, Development and Innovation Committee of ENTSO-E. Uroš, ENTSO-E has for some time developed has been engaged in research and development activities, and now has a flagship project called Technopedia. So there is quite a good overview of different technical solutions which are out there. What are your thoughts on boosting grid efficiency by using these solutions? Do you think it's needed and worth investing into something like that? And what do you think would be a correct tool to sort of boost them? Do you think it should be done through incentive or enforcement? It's a bit of a tricky question, yeah, because some of the regulatory parties, not in the EU, but necessarily, but are already looking into enforcement of such solutions. So would be glad to have your view on that. And the very last question for you would be, what is your take on the capacity of such solutions? So how much do you think, knowing the Technopedia and being involved into this research and development activities at the TSO level, how much could they add from your perspective? Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. Thank you for having me. Yes, it's really a huge work which you have performed here, and I know there were a lot of efforts put into this analysis and proposals, and I know how you started, and you really got to a very sophisticated stage. If you ask me directly, so can this help? Is enforcement needed? Can both either incentives or enforcement help? I definitely need to look from my standpoint, from the innovation perspective, because what we really want to do here is we want to boost the implementation of innovation. So it's very important to have in mind that this is not something which happens just for itself. It's not something off the shelf. Maybe the technologies and their implementation can be straightforward. But if you want to have a successful implementation, which brings the expected benefits, that's another story. And that's usually super hard. And if we usually look for this successful implementation of alternative, better solutions, of course, we have to, more costly solution, we have to look for their economic efficiency, how they relate to the risk, and how they, of course, relate to the performance, what Clara just said. And here I have to say that when I walk around my company, I only see that this can be done by the best people. This can only be done by human resources which are really on the top edge, which are highly motivated, and which can really perform this just because they are so good that they can do that. And if TSOs are really, like we many times hear, capex biased, or oriented, then such people would really be all around these companies, and they should be relaxed. They should have a lot of time and so on. But unfortunately, this is not true. These guys are extremely loaded. These are heavily loaded people, and they have a lot of legal mandates to do, and that's quite a heavy burden for them. They already have a lot of things in their mind, and here is where also TSOs are many times late. So we have a lot of stuff to do for these guys. Which are the best candidates to do these important moves. And we have to somehow see these both sides, that now we get into the world where of course we can look into legally mandated or financially accelerated, I would say, innovation. But I think what we really need here is to understand that the NRAs and the TSOs together, what they really should do is they should somehow create this innovation culture within the TSO environments. This is something what we really need here. So if we can push in whatever direction this creation of this strong innovation culture, and I tell you, it's both sides. I have to say, neither TSOs probably don't have this intrinsic, culture of innovation, because we know it from this, big companies. How Apple and all these companies innovate. They have a different mindset in terms of innovation, and we have to create this, because this is the only way how we can avoid looking just for the things which must be done, which should be done, maybe called little mandates or otherwise. So I think we have to bridge this step. We need to find new ways how to push this innovation quality forward. Maybe the stimulus which we are looking for should somehow be transferred to the endpoint, to these best guys. So did we ever see a person from a TSO getting millions because he created these benefits? That's the real point. And this is happening on the other side. This is happening in the industry, but it's not happening here because it's really big, and it's a huge change we have to do. And you see, I'm not pushing against anything. I'm just saying what is there to be bridged and how different we should look if we really want to have what I said at the beginning, the full deployment of innovative solutions with proper management of risk, with all the benefits which this technology can show, so that also the industry and all the stakeholders can really say, now we have it right. And then we get to good reference point. So then we have at least one or two references how this should be done. And then, of course, all the rest can follow that. Because today we even don't have that. I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Raj. I think in between lines, right, you propose more incentives than enforcement, which I think would be the logical statement of system operators. I think nobody likes to be forced into whatever. And I have to agree that innovation probably cannot be motivated by using a stick approach. With that, I would move to the second speaker, who hopefully is online, and that is Guro Groterud from SmartN. Are you here? You are here. Let me just... Perfect. Hi. So SmartN is a European Association for Integration of Consumer-Driven Solutions. I think a very interesting speaker, also Guro, from your regulatory knowledge. I think you can combine a bit different worlds here and different aspects. My question to you, I would start off with the same question as I asked Uroš. I think maybe on that one I didn't get a correct or direct response. And that is, what do you think is the capacity of, let's call it, non-wire solutions? I know that SmartN is more a bit focusing on flexibility things, but I think this could also be easily labeled as non-wired solutions. So could flexibility, for example, I mean, this was not the main element of the assessments, either also in the sample cases, but it, I think, falls in a sort of similar category. So could this flexibility be another dimension of projects that could be unlocked through this benefit sharing scheme? The floor is yours, Guro. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, just to answer, yes, definitely flexibility is one of probably several different kinds of innovative no-wire solutions. And we think, and we know actually, that such solutions can bring massive benefits and lower the costs for the system. So we absolutely welcome the effort of this work here of trying to define an incentive mechanism for innovative solutions. We know that such solutions have the potential of allowing us to use existing infrastructure, so no, not new infrastructure, but the existing one, in a more efficient way, and thus allow more electrification and integration of more renewables with a faster and more affordable energy transition as a result. And the potential of these technologies is and processes, it's huge. We made in SmartN, we made a report in 2022. You can have a look at it on our website, about the benefits from demand-side response, demand-side flexibility, and it concluded on a potential of, for many different sectors, but one of the conclusions was a potential of more than 300 billion in indirect annual benefits to people, communities, and businesses. And this would result from reductions in energy prices as a whole, generate capacity costs, but also investment needs for grid infrastructure, system balancing, and carbon emissions. So yes, definitely flexibility is one of the innovative solutions that could potentially, that the system operators should receive incentives to use. Now, I think a question is to which extent this proposed scheme could help such solutions. I wouldn't say that they couldn't, and I think that this work is very important. But I also see some potential caveats, let's say, or to turn it another way around, some further steps that could potentially be taken. I see that the proposed incentive scheme is very much focused on costs. And when it comes to flexibility, you have let's say on the one hand, the market-based flexibility, which actually allows for optimal dispatch of resources. That's why we use markets generally. And then you have the rule-based flexibility, with an important example being flexible connection agreements, mostly without any costs for the system operator. So that would be a very preferable solution in this scheme for the system operator. However, with potentially enormous hidden costs for the flexibly connected grid user. So this is one reason I think it's very important to focus on the benefits of the innovative schemes and not only on the potential cost savings, because cost savings for the system is not necessarily the only thing that leads to a more optimal and efficient use of the system. But I think, yeah, the work is important and the potential is enormous.
Thank you, Guro. I agree, and as mentioned, I think flexibility maybe was not the core focus of this work, but I think in general flexibility will play an increasingly important role in the near future. So getting incentives to help it work, to facilitate, to start it off, I think is quite necessary. Otherwise, it will have difficulties as anything else. Thank you, Guro. Moving on to my next speaker, whose last name I for sure will mispronounce. So, Michael van Bossut.
Yes, you actually pronounce it quite well.
Well, surprisingly. So, Federation of Belgian Industry Energy Consumers, that's, I think, is always valuable and I think too often forgotten voice of consumers. So, how do you see and how does the industry see this? I would say probably you see it from the perspective of the costs, right? And a bit of a fear that a major part of these costs would fall on the industrial shoulders, let's call it like that. So how do you see maybe this and also the incentives that we are discussing here? Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. Yeah, maybe to start, we're moving towards a green transition of the industry. And a lot of that transition will go for 90%, for the majority will go through electrification. For some hard to abate sectors, it will go through CCS, CCU. But one thing we're all aware of is that this electrification, which will require massive amounts of electricity, more than we are used in the past, will have a high cost. And then going back to the trilemma we're seeing is that you actually have to make sure that you do something for the environment, and that has been the focus on putting renewable energy in the system. There has been security of supply, and I think the last few years have shown that there is an importance on that one. But the third element there is the costs. And indeed, for us, industry, cost means also competitiveness in comparison with the rest of the world. Because if we can't be competitive with the rest of the world, we can't survive. So we actually are dying off. And that's something you see right now with the ongoing energy crisis. I'm going to go back to what Guro is saying as a flexibility, definitely. And what do you need for flexibility to develop? It's price signals. And we've seen with the energy crisis, which is still ongoing today, gas prices in Europe are 7 times higher than they are in the US, with all the impacts on all the other costs that are derived from that. So the energy crisis is not over. The most visible part of it is over, but the crisis is going on, and we are feeling it as industry. The crisis has shown that consumers are, to a certain extent, quite price sensitive. A lot of it has been demand destruction, but there is a reaction to prices. So that's really flexibility is there. However, and that's something we have discussions also with the Commission, flexibility comes with a trade-off. You can be flexible, but if you're flexible, you're not necessarily completely energy efficient, and your emissions might not be the lowest. And so you can't do it all at the same time. You can't be and flexible and completely energy efficient and have no emissions. At some point, there's a trilemma, and there's a trade-off to be done. Coming to what we are discussing today, the massive amounts of electricity we will need in the future for electrification come, of course, with additional investment needs in grids, but also, and even more so, in a better use of the grids we have today. Grids are very expensive, and they have a clear role and a clear function, and can help market integration, can help costs driving them down. But at some point, you need to make the best with the grids you have today. And the CapEx bias, and I know some don't like it, but the CapEx bias for system operators makes that we are not necessarily doing that. I mean, all the discussions we are having on CACM 2.0 is partially that. It's seeing how we can make better, more efficient use of current grids instead of building ever more grids. And coming as one of the later speakers, the problem is that lots of topics have been made, so I can only agree or discuss them. And so Clara is very right. It is not easy in the proposed approach, which I actually support. I mean, it's good to try to come with something that makes better use of existing grids to make sure that we get the most value out of what we already spent. But there is a huge information asymmetry between an NRA and a TSO. So having to come up as an NRA with the standard or the optimal solution is very difficult. And then how will you force as an NRA to TSO to come up with innovative solutions? And I hear people saying, hey, of course, you're not going to earn the millions that you might do in the private sector, but you're not exposed either. You're a regulated monopoly, so your costs are covered in any case. If you don't want that, just go in business. Do like industry. Make the billions. If you're really good, you're going to make them. But you can't have it both ways. And so it's really there. Hey, this is a lot about benefit sharing, but I didn't hear anything about the risk sharing. And so the risk is put on society, on the grid users, in a more innovative way. So the cost might be lower, but it's really, you try something, and if it works, you get something. If it fails, that's too bad, and everything goes to the grid users. So how do you get the incentives completely right? Taking into account, again, what Clara said, the future system needs. It's not so easy always to identify system needs. We see from all the adequacy assessments that if you look at what is forecasted and reality ex post, then you see there is a slight mismatch. I'll try to be positive here. So there's really something to be done there. One of the elements I'm also missing a bit in the paper and in discussion today, is it on top? I always hear on top, it's something extra. Well, no, it should actually replace something, because if you don't build a grid, it's replacing something with something else, with less capex, with maybe different incentive schemes. And so how to push towards that to make sure that you do it. And second, when do you start considering this the standard solution? So when do you switch from giving benefit sharing, extra incentives towards this is now the standard, everybody has to do it, and you don't get any more money? So how do you switch from one to the other? Because now you look at it from a very static approach, but of course there's a time element in there. The risk sharing, coming back to that one, it's also we all know, and it's not necessarily completely their fault, but system operators are prone to have time and cost overruns. We all know that projects were estimated at some price and at some delivery period, and most of the time they don't end up there, neither in timing nor in cost. So how do you then take this into account? Again, the NRA has to go in God mode to have a perfect view of the future system needs of a standard solution, and then comparing that with something that comes from the TSO, which they still have to challenge also, because the TSO can just put a number there, so you still have to challenge it. So I really see some very good elements in there. It's really pushing towards a better use of existing assets, making sure that you get the most of what you have. I'm trying to go against the capex bias. So it's really, I see much added value, but it also raises a lot of additional research questions, but maybe even trial and error questions. How to really implement this and make sure that this brings the real value of the existing grid out. So yeah, I'll stop there because I have so many notes, but I'll stop there for now. Thank you.
Thank you, but you raised a couple of very, very important issues. I think some of them were already reflected, right, by Clara. These estimates of information is an important factor, right? I think we are sort of looking at it from the perspective of as we stand right now. I think, as was said, we would need the regulators to maybe step up their game a bit in terms of knowledge and understanding. And the information asymmetry is already now playing a role and you know, in a negative way, and it shouldn't, right? So already now, without such an incentive, we shouldn't have such a big information asymmetry as we do. But maybe, you know, last but not least, Alberto Potočnik, I'm gonna introduce you with the two-head approach, because I think I would like to hear your views from not just your current FSR role, but also a bit from your previous director of ACER. perspective, having, of course, vast knowledge on the regulatory topics, but also, the behavior of regulators and the TSOs and DSOs also to some extent, of course. So what do you think? And also, could you maybe a bit reflect onto some of the positions that, for example, Clara made and Michael made, and also maybe what Uros was saying in Gura? Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. A very interesting discussion, very constructive. I mean, this is clearly a never-ending development because, well, regulation has been a never-ending development from the mid-80s when Professor Littlechild came up with the RPI-X, and then, we moved from there. I think we are in a new paradigm. I think Clara also agreed with it. And I think we shouldn't, and the future needs in terms of grid developments are huge with respect to what we've been used in the past. So this is what changes the game, is that there's never been in the past, so much required in terms of accelerated grid development, anticipatory investment, etc. And so any savings that we can achieve, it's big money because the total is big money. And even if a few percentages of savings here and there, it's big savings for consumers, and consumers are already paying quite a lot for different reasons. And so we should be seriously looking into any tool. I mean, this one, as Nicolas said, is not supposed to replace what we have. Is another tool in the box of regulators that they can use. Indeed, Clara was correct in saying this has now been developed mostly for individual projects. I think the next challenge is to think that whether this could also be used in some variant, some adaptation to a set of projects at, for example, DSO levels. Another example that we have in the report is connection of renewable energy. You might think that that the target put to TSOs might be not just to connect one plant, but to connect a set of plants of renewable energy renewable energy capacity. And then you start to see what is the challenge for DSOs as we are learning the hard way in some places. So this is basically what I think is. It's not the end of the story. It's not the whole story. It's just one part of the story, and it's probably just the beginning of the story. But you have to start from somewhere. As I said, from RPI-X in 1984, we moved quite a lot. But unless Professor Littlechild, and I don't want to compare this to what Professor Littlechild came up with, but unless somebody starts, we are not getting there. So now the alternative is obviously mandating. And for example, FERC in the US, we had a bit of a description in the report about, the situation in the US. They tried to do something to try to incentivize grid enhancing technologies. In the end, they decided to mandate, and there I think it's quite interesting to assess their experience because they started quite ambitious, and you can be quite ambitious if you are setting incentives. Partly because of information asymmetry, and a regulator could say there is a target there. We are not, as a regulator, I'm not mandating the TSO to reach the target, but if you reach the target, it's up to you to decide where to place yourself with respect to the target. The closer you get to the target, the more incentive you get. If you're mandating, then you have to be a bit more careful because if something goes wrong, then people will point at you, and regulators can do a lot of things, but are not particularly good at taking blame for things that are not in their remit. So in the end, FERC ended up with mandating, I think, ambient line rating plus the possibility of those owners who want to go beyond, which if you think it's not much. Yes, it's a step forward. For some reason, well, we could stay here probably until this evening to discuss why they were not able to go beyond that. They had a big pushback by the TSOs. But I think it's the problem there was not the idea which I had, which I think was pretty similar to the one that we're trying to develop here, but it's the way in which they wanted to implement it. So it's I think they probably rely too much on ISOs there. But anyway, so this is why incentives, at least in my view, are better than mandating, unless there are sort of basic security issues where you don't, there is a bottom line where you don't want to fall below. But incentive can be quite powerful. Now, I think, Jan, you mentioned, NRAs, are they on board? I can see a philosophical issue here. The reluctance of regulators to pay regulated entities for something the regulated entities could or should do anyway. It's a philosophical issue, I think. I think Uros mentioned the fact that one need a change of mindset, and then one wonder why you should pay people to change their minds or their mindset. The world evolves, and they should be they should be somehow changing with it. I think the reality is that you do need some powerful incentive to get organization to move. CEOs get bonuses, managers get bonuses, and as I said, in regulation, this has been practiced since the mid-80s. So I think yes, we need to work with incentives because then we achieve savings also for consumers. One example in Italy was that consumers received quite significant savings. The TSO got a good incentive, but most of the savings from a much more efficient, innovative solution were actually passed on to consumers. And what would have been the counterfactual? Well, I'm not sure. Probably life as always, because so it's true that now we have new technologies, but somehow coincidentally, this innovation came at the right time. So now these are my sort of general remarks. Then a few, if I can also address some of the issues that have been raised. Uncertainty and risk. Yes, there is information asymmetry. So there are some risks which regulated entities are better to take, and they should take. Operational risks, for example, or the risk of investment overruns in terms of time and cost, unless they are, due to external factors. There are other risks about the uncertainty in the future, which I think the system should take, because uncertainty. I mean, the world now is much more uncertain than it has ever been, or the future world now looks more uncertain than it has ever been. I don't know anyone could have predicted maybe 5 years ago what would have happened in the last 5 years. I challenge anyone to say that this was predictable. And if you leave investors, TSOs and investors to face this risk, then the cost of capital would be much, much higher. And I think the system is much better. On top of this, we are pushing a transition, which is I wouldn't say politically motivated transition, but at least a policy motivated transition, which is, we're pushing it much faster than we've ever pushed anything in the past. Even, the renewable penetration to 2020 was forced a bit, but now we are really ask everybody to run. And whether, what type of future we will be facing is not something that I think we should leave this. So somebody should stick the neck out. Now, maybe I make the wrong analogy, but at the moment there is a lot of discussion about what happens with hydrogen. And we need a lot of hydrogen, not a lot of hydrogen. Only hydrogen valleys, a European-wide backbone. If we wait until the future realizes, we will be late. Somebody should stick the neck out and say, this is the future we want. They get it wrong? Well, there is always a chance. But for sure, if no one decides and stick the neck out and say, this is the future which we're planning on, nothing will happen. And the future will come before we're ready for it. So that's in terms of risk. Then sort of cost sharing, benefit sharing, and value. Clearly, at the end of the day, what matters is value for consumers. The example of, I think, flexible connection, which I think is a good example. It could be another areas where this scheme could be somehow, or some variants of this scheme could be implemented. Yes, indeed, they are not as good. Flexible connection is not as good as a traditional connection, but then I suspect it would be offered voluntarily at a cheaper price. And then for the DSO connecting, that should be one way of using the current asset better, especially where it's very difficult to build new assets, or where it will take a lot of time to build new assets, or where we may find that this is a much better way than building new assets for connections which are at full capacity, only used very few times a year. So it could be another example. We had 3 in the report, many more could be developed, and maybe in the future we'll start developing more, just to see whether the same logic, not necessarily the same scheme, but the same logic could be applied. Value should be appropriated by the system. Here is how you deliver some system needs at least cost. Whether the system needs are the right one or not, this is about planning in most cases, and this is sort of above and beyond the current scheme. I have lots of notes. I could go on forever, but I think that's enough.
Thank you, Alberto. I think, one important aspect that was mentioned, not just by you, but also by Michael and I guess others, in some sense or the other, is the value to the consumers. And I think in the future with this transition, what we can all expect to happen is that the energy part of the bill might become lower and the tariff part of the bill might become higher. And that proportion might reach levels where consumers would say, what is happening? How come, I'm paying basically just for the grid and almost nothing for the energy. I'm giving an extreme example, but this is something that could happen, and that's why I think this tariff part should be, basically minimized to the extent possible. And the grid build out needs to be there, needs to happen. There's going to be a lot of grids that will need to be built, a lot of infrastructure, but using what we have and will have efficiently will help minimize those costs. So in that respect, I think, it's helping minimize the aftershock of the transition itself. Before going to the Q&A, I would give maybe if somebody from the panel has any remarks or questions to the other panelists, because especially the ones who spoke soon didn't have the option to react. So if somebody wants to react, let me know. Uroš, yeah, please.
Maybe just a quick remark from my side. So don't get me wrong. I didn't say the TSOs are not innovation prone, that we need to be pushed to innovate. That's far from what I was saying. I was actually saying, Alberto, that mentality is there, but the ambition we have here is exceeding every mentality that you can imagine that exists in the system. Even Americans, if you look to the Americans, they're still trying to find the way to get through, first through incentives, then through mandates, but it's still not there. The solutions are still not there. They're still not deploying stuff, and it's super extra hard. And I'm talking about this challenge, So I can say that, of course, DSOs, we're trying to do as much as we can, but that's not going to be enough. If we want to reach the ambition which you have, we have to put the best people to be highly motivated to get away from something what is just time consuming and do this stuff, and that's really going to be extra hard. And I think we are always underestimating the load and the hard way, of achieving these things. Implementation of things can last 5 years, 10 years, 15 years very quickly, and that's the reality. And I just don't know how to explain how important it is that we don't get lost by incentives and forget about this important element. Thank you.
Thank you, Uroš. I think, but incentive, if the incentive is given to the system operator to act efficiently, I guess then it's on the system operator to also share this incentive with its employees, in the sense that the employees are motivated in the same direction, right?
Jan, this is science, It's science how you do innovation culture in the company. You know, nobody, I think, at this table is really knowledgeable enough to talk about that. You know, but go to companies which are highly innovative in this world, and they will tell you. But probably they will not tell you because they keep it as a secret. And this is what we're talking about. It's really extra heavy. Sorry.
Thank you, Michael.
Yeah, maybe also one comment from my side. The targets and the challenges are massive. And so the question at some point becomes, can we even physically build the grids that are on the maps, on the plans, on all the forward projections, and can we afford them? So it's not going to be a question whether you do this or something else. You will have to do everything. So you will have to go to flexibility because it's no regret. It's secondary use of assets that you have built for another reason. So it's cheaper in a way, and you reuse something you have. You will maybe have to go to flexible connections because if you can't build a grid, then you have to make efficient use of that. You will have to look, and it's something we're not talking here, it's regional approach. How will you go beyond, because also the example is 2 countries, but how will you go to a regional approach? How will you make sure that you get that integration? It's not market coupling, it's market integration. It's going towards a unified system. And this is one of the elements. So I think it's no regret. The question will be, is it going to be faster and more efficient than building grids? Because there, you know, permits, but also even just the planning stage takes decades at some point. And so this, if it really wants to bring a lot of value, I think it will bring value, it can bring value, but then we have to make sure that it can go fast and efficient, and also that if we learn lessons that it doesn't work, then cut it off and start with something new. But don't do a project till the end because you decided to do it. At some point, you have to cut your losses if it's not bringing the value. But fast and efficient will be needed to make sure that the challenges are there. Because if I look at the objectives we have for climate neutrality towards 2050, I mean, if you start planning now and then you do all the projects, they won't be there in time. And so we won't be able to do our part if that part is not done. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Gura?
Yeah, thank you. I'm not going to comment largely about the Alberto's description of flexible connection agreements. I think this is not the topic of today. We are not totally against these mechanisms, but I think an important question here. You mentioned, Jan, the importance of the incentive scheme enhancing or incentivizing more efficiency, and I think that is really a key notion. And I think it's important to remember that efficiency is more than just lower costs of what is directly paid by the system operator. So I think this is something that could be further considered in further works. Looking forward to that. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not sure if Alberto, you want to say something, or we go to the Q&A. Yeah. So I'm opening first the floor to the room. So if we have Laila already. Okay, perfect. Here you go.
Yeah, so this is just a question to Uros, but also just a general comment. I think also to what technologies are really still considered innovation and which are not, because I've never worked for a TSO, so maybe you can clarify for me, but my impression is that DLR is not really considered so innovation anymore. So, you know, it's more about deploying these solutions, but and then to save the really best guys for the harder stuff than that. But I'm curious to hear.
I think Jan will confirm this. You know, if you take DLR as a standard tool, put it in your grid, and recognize that already today, for temporary situations, your grid can be overloaded for 20%, and the DLR might bring 10% or 5% or 50%. Will you use DLR for that? You need a very sophisticated tool to really bring DLR into the process to tackle with temporary overloads, or to be used for long-term overloads, where you will face the impact assessment challenges because your permit is not allowing these temporary overloads, you know, and long-term overloads. So there are a lot of challenges, and this is what these guys have to do. You know, they have to bring a lot of new elements into implementation. So bring the technology in life and implementing this technology into the field to bring the real benefits, that's a completely different story. But you need innovation on both sides. And we're underestimating how hard it is to put these things in operation. This is what I'm saying.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, Charles.
Thank you, Jan. Just first of all, a shameless plug, but on the distribution level, like the Technopedia, EDSO has the technology radar, which was just updated a few days ago. So I encourage people to take a look at that. I have two questions. One is about what was presented itself, and my question is, aren't you assuming sort of just the right range of information asymmetry between the, in this case, TSO and the NRA? Because if you have too much, they can't really make an assessment. And if you have too little, the incentive is going to be tiny, right? So you need just the right amount of information symmetry. And is that really the right assumption to make? And my second question is, how does this all apply to DSOs, particularly considering the diversity of DSOs, DSOs that have 20,000 customers and DSOs that have 38 million? And how does this apply differently to them than just sheer number of DSOs that are out there? How would you apply it there? And how does this relate to DSO-TSO relations? Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. No, I think on the information asymmetry, I think it's more a role. Regulators should not run the TSO's business. It's up to the TSO's business to run it, and DSOs. It's for the regulated entities to run the business, and the regulator should set the framework within which they run the business. So I think there will always be, and there has to be, because of the different role, there has to be an information asymmetry. And the issue is how you can provide the right stimulus for those who know better, that they do the best that they can do. So that is basically what it is. And I'm all with you, Uroš. I mean, I didn't want to say that they are not. I mean, actually, the TSOs are a bunch of very good people, technically excellent people. I think the incentive needs to be there, as you said, to make sure that doing more, implementing more efficient innovative solution becomes the top priority there, and that is probably more a matter of incentive for management. That is the priority, rather than, for example, because I mean, I think we all agree that at least in the old days, this was a RAB business, and investors were looking at getting a return, a nice, stable, maybe not super exciting, but a nice, stable return on RAB. Well, the world is changing, and I think also, as I said, the paradigm should change. So in terms of information asymmetry, in my view, they will always be there. The TSOs will always, and the DSOs will always know their business better than anybody else. And the idea is to try to make sure that they use this knowledge in the right way, to try to get more efficient and innovation. Would this scheme work for DSOs? I think, as I mentioned beforehand, maybe not as it is written now, but a variant of this scheme applied to a more dispersed system need, put it this way. It's not just improving the capacity between two countries, but maybe, I mentioned we have an example, improving the capacity for connecting renewable sources. I think it's likely that it could be used, but we're still at the beginning of the story.
Thank you, Alberto. Before giving the floor for other comments, just a quick look to the online participants who outweigh us in numbers, of course. So I should probably just read maybe a couple of questions on their end. I think there are very interesting ones. So Elizabeth is saying thank you, of course, for the presentation. And what sort of timeframes do we expect would be needed for national regulators to put such an approach into practice? That's a few laughs, right? Because, well, luckily, I mean, I'm despite coming from ACER and many labeling us as, you know, the European regulators, we are not that, you know, so I cannot judge, but I think it also depends on the ambition of the regulator, the capacity of the regulator, and also the policy push.
Sorry, Yanni, too. But one regulator has already implemented something like, not exactly this one, but something that I would put in the same category. The Italian regulator did. And I think the outcome was quite interesting. So, you know, if they want, they can do it pretty quickly. I mean, it's a matter of few years.
In the Italian case, if I'm not wrong, reflections about something similar to what we propose started around 2016-17, and the scheme became operational in 2020 until 2023, and then it was prolonged to 2024. And now for the future, there is another variant. So we're not talking about decades. It's a matter of few years to think about and then to implement.
Okay, thank you. So if we are optimistic, it can be quite soon, but we have Clara with actual hands-on experience with that. Clara, please.
Yeah, I think it's not black and white. It's not the new system when can go live. Probably each system has its own regulation for, let's say, quality of service. Unfortunately, many times this is not related to innovation. So I fully agree that we need to find a way to change the mindset of system operators in order to really improve on innovation. And there are different ways of doing it. Pilot projects have been discussed for quite a while in Europe, for example. Anyway, in Italy, we took a stepwise approach. We are learning by doing. Jumping into the water all at once, I think is not possible, but you can start by identifying some project that where it's easier to apply a benefit-based incentive mechanism, and you start from there, and then you learn, and then you move forward. So I would say it's possible to start very quick if you do it step by step.
Thank you, Clara. Now going back to the room, we have a question at the end. Go ahead. Oh, wow. Goodness. You get it back.
Thank you very much. Diederik Perenboom, Secretary General of TND Europe. Thanks for the report. I've read not all of it, most of it. I didn't manage to finish it in time. I think it's a good basis to spark some discussion, some even indeed philosophical about who determines the system needs and how do you do that. On that point, I had to think of a meeting that took place in the same house not too long ago on the smart grid indicators, which I don't want to go into it now, but it may be very relevant. In representing the industry, I think, of course, we're very much interested in innovation. And that's why we were also here, because our members, or at least some of our members, they put effort and resources into developing new technologies, new products that they believe and strongly believe will address some of the needs that exist in the system. Many of them are reflected in the technology radar, in Technopedia and the likes. But the main frustration that I hear from my members is it is a bit of a risky investment to do in that type of innovation, because we're not in a normal market where people are gonna take it up or not. And so the question is, how do we want to go about continuing innovation when it comes to the grid? And more concretely, in the report you propose, you need to have, let's say, the standard approach and a more innovative approach. Who determines what can be considered the innovative approach? And then you get into who basically determines whether it's mature enough. Yeah. And that's a question, that's a key question for us, because who do we need to convince that it's mature enough? And even if we believe and can prove that it's mature enough and it's still not being considered, what kind of signal does that give to future investments in innovation for European electricity grid? So I think there is one of the key aspects that we bump into, because there are a lot of innovations. And I remember the former head of NSOE also saying, there's so much innovation, but so much is still in boxes. It does not get into the system. And we share that belief. And we would like those innovations to come out of the boxes and be implemented and help address the needs that we see in the network. So we are curious to see how we can deal with that. Maybe this proposal is one way of doing it, but there may be others. So I'm not a regulatory expert nor an operator. So I'm just coming from industry with a couple of solutions. Thank you.
Thank you. You, Alberto, you wanna? I mean, I can also give it a quick try. I think because it sort of touches upon also the information asymmetry question, which I think is one which is sort of a common thread for all of this discussion. And I think, as mentioned by Alberto also, the information asymmetry is something that cannot disappear. It will be there. I think we have to accept it and understand it. When it comes to the maturity of the innovative solution, where I think, the knowledge on the NRA side, of course, is even further behind the one on the TSO system operator side. It's on the system operators to decide when the project is sufficiently mature that they will take the risk to propose it. I mean, they would, of course, be rewarded by that risk because by taking that risk, because the innovation would be much cheaper in comparison to the standard solution. When it comes to the standard solution, I believe the NRAs, to some extent, should be capable enough to propose something like that, maybe being very basic and basing the standard solution on standard unit costs. So we have that data, and they can run also maybe sort of an academic process of establishing academic projects that, theoretical projects that could fulfill the needs of the system. And then this would open up the bids for cheaper projects that then would be incentivized through that. Anybody wants to add to what I said, or maybe feels a bit differently from the panel, Alberto or anybody else? If not, then I have two questions here, which I unfortunately skipped. Anka from DG NRA, if you can go first. And
Thanks a lot, Jan. So my question regards something that, Michael, you were saying about existing grids and making best use of them. And I mentioned this in my initial intervention, that what we see is that we need massive development of new grids and making best use of existing grids. So we shouldn't let the discourse of one of them lose the perspective of the other. And I just wanted, I read the study as well yesterday quickly, and I think that the scheme proposed there applies also to new investments, but maybe you could confirm.
Yes, the idea is for new solution, new projects.
It could also, you mean if somebody goes ahead with a classical solution, infrastructure solution, whether this would apply also to new infrastructure?
No, I mean, if we talk about, because the example you gave was an upgrade of existing interconnectors, but for example, if you talk about a new interconnector, you could still find innovative solutions to versus the traditional one to maybe lower the cost.
If you allow me to one, and I don't want to open discussion on the specific topic, but one of the discussions now ongoing is, do we need offshore bidding zones or not? So it's really, if we build infrastructure, do we want a different use of that infrastructure? And don't want to go into discussion on whether or not, etc. But it's really looking how you can. I always say there's hardware and there's software. And also on the software side, you have to look how you do it. CACM 2.0 is also a discussion on how we are going to use existing grids more efficiently. The example of the phase shifter is one. How with limited hardware investments you can tune. So that's somewhere in between. So it's really, for me, it's not just looking at do you build a new line or something else. It's also looking how you can make better use of existing lines. Dynamic line rating is an interesting one, because in Belgium we have done that. And so there were some incentive schemes, but not based on this model, but on a different model, but to actually see how this could be implemented to make sure that you make better use of existing grids. It's the HCLS upgrades we do of certain grids. It's to get more capacity through partially existing infrastructure, because you reuse part of it. It's hanging new lines on existing towers. So really to see if with new technology, without going all the way the capex, an extra line. No, what is more? So this is, for me, it goes beyond many of the cases I described, because you only can discuss so many cases, of course. But it's really, for me, is an added value, because it can bring on the side, but this is not going to be the solution. It's not a silver bullet, but it's one of the avenues you can take to see how you can push towards better use also of new and existing, and make sure that you look at more different options. That's, for me, is the most important one here, is to open the scope for a broader view, not just investing in grids, but what can you do?
Solution neutrality. Before moving to Guro, who has her hand patiently up, I hand over to you, please.
Thank you. So Marta Lovisolo for RGI Renewable Grid Initiative. I wanted to ask, in this sort of scheme, if you considered introducing non-price criteria and how they would play into this. So in between two solutions, a standard and innovative one, they have definitely differences in prices and cost, but they probably have a different impact on nature and on people and the entire ecosystem around it. So how do we take into account these different impacts, these non-price impacts, when deciding what's the optimal solution, not just from an economic perspective, but from a societal perspective?
Do you mean externalities?
Yeah, externalities can be climate externalities, biodiversity externalities, but also positive. No, sometimes we can do integrated vegetation management under an electricity line, and this can actually give contributions and not, positive externalities.
I'm afraid we did not really consider these aspects. I mean, in the study, we say that benefits of the various solutions are not always and not all easily monetizable. So that's why actually the proposal looks at the cost of the alternative solution and interpret benefit as a cost reduction rather than other harder to measure benefits. I assume that we could qualify the scheme to incentivize more innovative solutions that are also better, more environmental friendly. But of course, the more criteria you put on a scheme, the heavier it becomes to implement it. So I would be cautious to attach too many goals to the same tool. So probably the usual environmental impact assessment is the best way to go forward. But we did not really research on it.
Also, in most cases, is trying to replace, not always, but try to replace CapEx with OpEx. And in general, you would expect that OpEx has a lower impact on the environment. Not always, but in general. But this is an aspect that we haven't looked into. We actually, there is a discussion in the in the report a bit on the difference between value of cost and cost, because sometimes they're confused. But maybe this is an aspect that going forward, is worth considering. To what extent externality should come into the picture and where? Because clearly when you do planning, externalities do come into the picture when you decide, what are the system needs, for example. Whether they come also in a scheme of this kind is something that how, and if so, how, it's something that I think requires a bit of reflection. But probably, as Nicola was saying, a capex light solution is less impacting on the environment than a capex heavy solution. But that's a very general.
But if it's also, I think, looking at the cost and benefits, so the CBA methodology is actually a multi-criteria methodology. So it's not even now just looking at the cost and benefits on a monetized level. So taking on board all of these additional potential benefits or costs, however you treat them, I think can be done. It's not going against the logic of the approach. So, but it's, the emphasis would need to come, of course, from those assessing, meaning, again, the NRAs would need to say, okay, we agree that this is something very important for us, so we give some more thought to that. Thank you for the interesting question. Guro, please.
Thank you. So I just want to come a little bit back to the comment from T&D Europe, because I perceive your question or your comment as part of it being how to get new technology or new processes over from this sandbox and over to scalability and one-day business as usual. I think this is a very important question. As concerns flexibility, but I don't think it's only related to flexibility. One thing is trying it in smaller, very small scale projects, very isolated. Another thing is bringing up to scale. So as concerns market-based flexibility, you would have, of course, the system operator would have costs related to the procurement of flexibility. But for scalability, you also need some, let's say, startup costs. And I believe that is common for other innovative technologies or processes as well. That could be investment in software. It could be such as a platform. It could be investment in processes, such as definition of market rules, products, etc. The building up of a market, but also potentially substantial changes in the operational and planning processes of the system operator. And if you need to include all these costs in a case-by-case incentive scheme, it potentially gets a bit tricky. So I think that these concerns don't disqualify the suggested scheme, but I think it's important to remember the existence of these costs that might be addressed by a complementary mechanism. So both for flexibility and any other innovative costs.
Thank you, Guro. I'm going to take the opportunity to go back a bit to the online participants. We have also, also a question on what happens if the innovative solution is not enough and a new line will be needed anyway. So that would only add up to the cost and not really be efficient. So how to avoid such a problem? Would somebody want to tackle that? Or
if it is not developed, it won't be paid, the innovative solution. And probably, I don't know, this is something that has, the levels of enforcement, and we're just getting to the implementation. But if it is not developed, it's not paid. And probably if a regulated entity proposes a solution and doesn't implement it, maybe can also be penalized. So I think we are talking about here, once we get to eventually one would have also to get to enforcement issues. But for the time being, we assume that everybody is working in the same direction. It's only to try to find what is the best solution. And if the best solution is found, then it's implemented. But there are ways, there are regulatory tools to first to avoid consumer paying twice, and secondly also to make sure that the incentives of implementing it are very strong.
We have Clara also online, maybe wants to react to this.
Sorry if I step in. I think this is a very relevant question. It goes back to measuring performance. If I were able to clearly identify the performance instead of discussing the technical solution to get that performance, then I could link the recognized revenues to the performance. And of course, the performance can be obtained, reached or not, but it can be even just a share of it that you get it and a share you don't. And there are a lot of ways to just graduate the incentive. But still, you need to measure the performance more than the technology. That's the only way, in my opinion, to be sure that you are paying what you were promised, for what you were promised.
Thank you, Clara. Uros, I see.
Yeah, but what I hear here is a typical implementation risk, which happens all the time with new technologies. It's depending on the maturity of the technology, but also depends on how good you are in assessing all these risks. And of course, TSO should decide not to go forward if the risk is too high. That's important element, but you really need to be clever to decide on this.
Thank you. I have a question at the end. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Bram Klaes of RAP, the Regulatory Systems Project, and thank you very much appreciate the proposal. I just would like to go to something that has been referred to a lot and is a central issue, of course, is the risk and the information asymmetry between system operators and regulators, and the identification of value that can be unlocked with the innovative solutions. I'm a bit surprised that we don't talk more about how to actually identify that value and make sure that it's apparent also to market actors and consumers, but consumers of all types and sorts. And therefore, given that we're talking about grid investments, how important it is to have correct price information in the energy market to identify where investments are needed and for other solutions to come forward and offer maybe relief to congestion or other issues that arise. And therefore, how important it is to combine this proposal with, of course, the basis of correct price formation in the market, notably in terms of locational pricing, which is, of course, one of the areas of, let's call it, improvement in the European market system. So would you agree that that is an important complement to the introduction of performance incentives like these?
I would leave aside for a moment not pricing, because it's somewhat a different discussion. It can come in, but again, it's quite sensitive, and I would prefer not to comment. I think value comes in, but at least in my view, it comes at a previous stage when one has to decide, what are the system needs. And I would not, and I think there is, we put this in the report as well. I'm not sure the regulated entities should be assigned the value for a number of reasons. First, they don't belong to them. Secondly, because the value could, for example, if we are looking at the value of new interconnector as the congestion income, can be going up and down year after year. And it's determined by a large number of factors, very few of which are actually under the control of the TSO. So what seems a very appealing what seemed a couple of years ago as a very appealing way of providing incentives, to me is a very risky way of providing incentives, because prices, as we know, can go up and down very quickly. And but this is my personal view, that value does not belong to the regulated entity, it belongs to the system. What the regulated entity should do is, on the basis of a clear system needs, define using them also the values of emerging from the market, they should try to deliver it in the most efficient, innovative way. That's their business. Other actors have other businesses to deal with. The regulators have to take values into account and try to maximize the value and minimize the cost for consumers. And in that process, with the assistance of TSO, come up with what is needed. But that's a different exercise. Is the exercise before that. There is a circularity in here, because obviously if you can deliver something more cheaply, then you can deliver more. And so the setting of system needs is endogenous. But I think if we go down that route, we'll never end up anywhere. So I think for this purpose, one has to somehow break the circle and say there are some system needs which are developed on the basis of the value that some developments can bring, and then TSOs or DSOs or in general regulated entities should be tasked with achieving them in the best possible way.
Thanks, Alberto. Now final question, right? Because we are out of time, so hopefully it's a quick one.
Yeah, great. Thanks. No pressure. It is a very good one. I wanted to pick up on the maybe full circle and nice for your closure about the question of who does the system needs assessments. And we talked about the regulators and we talked about the system operators, but you also had the example of the UK in your paper, and they're transitioning towards a model of like independent system planner, in which parts that planning function gets out of the electricity system operator and the gas system operator is merged in a now state-owned body, which then becomes responsible for a bit more planning. But I think I heard a bit skeptical perception from you on the ISO type model in the US. But yeah, just interested in that, because it feels to me like it might be a nice way to get the transparency and kind of independent planning that everyone seems to want.
Well, maybe a very interesting question, and it's not just related to this, it's more generally, who is planning. And I think ACER and CR back in 2015 published a report, I think was called A Bridge to 2025, which actually a chapter on this, which raised a lot of feedback. Well, planning should be done by someone who does not have an interest on a specific solution. Okay, clearly. So that was the theme of that report. And here we're trying to align with these schemes. In a sense, we're trying to align the interest of some regulated entities to the interest of the system more than it has been the case until now. And this we can also discuss forever. So, but at the end of the day, to the extent that planning depends on scenarios, to the extent that scenarios are uncertain and the future is uncertain, even though the technical work may be done by the TSOs, it should be the policymakers and the regulator that says this is a scenario on which we will base our actions. There is no one else. If we leave to the TSOs, it would cost a fortune, because investors in TSO would need to be rewarded for. So, that's the most important thing. It should be unbiased, but then the risk, not the risk, the operational risk, the investment risk, but the risk of the risk of the future, now more than ever, should be taken by the system.
Thank you, Alberto. With that, despite I'm sure having a lot of questions from the audience online and here in the room, I would move to the closing, because we promised to wrap up by 4 and we failed to do that. So we are a couple of minutes. So Rafa, please.
So it's not the classical webinar that is easy to wrap up. So I will try to do it in 1 minute, also because we are out of time. But first, I want to thank you very much for FSR for the intense work and the work that will continue. to the speakers, to those that attended physically, but also those that were online. I would say that we cannot say that we agreed on all topics for sure, but I was trying to note down a number of elements where I believe we have some common place, some common directions. One is the agreement or the understanding that is a policy relevant initiative. The understanding that we need both innovation but also investments, traditional investments, so both are needed. The preference for incentives versus enforcing, and the recognition that there are different challenges. I'm not going to list all of them because there are many, but the feeling also that we need to start somewhere, that we need to get kick started, and we have some good practices where to start. And also to say that from an ACER point of view, we are committed to seek opportunities to implement this together with regulators, and this will be part of our work in the months to come. We are willing to do so. This is to be continued in Copenhagen, and that's all. Thank you very much for spending this time with us, and I wish you a nice rest of the day. Thank you very much for those that are in the room online. Thank you.